First, let me say I come from a somewhat unconventional family. We are all a little weird or wacky in our own way. Sometimes we get along great and sometimes not so much. On Christmas Day, my parents and I usually stay home and don't see any of our extended family. However, this past year we decided to go to my grandmother's house. This is a little different because my grandmother and I have a very rocky relationship with one another. I have overheard my dad mentioning stories about my grandmother and my now deceased grandfather that bordered on child abuse. I remember being really young and my grandparents screaming at me for the smallest things and my parents abruptly taking me home. But anyway, I'm in my 20s now and my father decided since it was Christmas, we could give spending the holiday at my grandma's a chance. The day started out pretty uneventful and, dare I say, pleasant. A lot of conversations and happy memories. My dad and aunt were reminiscing about snowball fights and such from their childhood. There was a healthy conversation about politics, which I thought for sure would change the mood, but surprisingly did not. After several hours and a nice dinner, everyone made their way to the living room for coffee and to just hang out on the couches. I left my coffee on the kitchen table and made my way to the back of the house where the only bathroom was. I washed my hands, fixed my shirt, and walked out of the bathroom. When I walked into the hallway, I was greeted by my grandma, who was just standing there staring at me. I said, "Hi, what's going on?" And I tried to keep walking, but she wouldn't move. Now this is a narrow hallway and you're only fitting one across. "Excuse me, please," I said, semi-annoyed, yet still she did not budge at all. Finally, she spoke up and said, "What do you think you're doing?" She sounded nervous and almost a little angry. "I was just going to the bathroom," I said, starting to get uneasy about the entire situation. She started to poke my chest and said, "Where is he?" At this point, I was beyond confused. I told her I had no clue what she was talking about. Where's who? I finally shoved past her and started to make my way down the long hallway. That's when it happened. I heard her scream like a banshee and chase me down the hall. I turned around and she lunged at me with a small kitchen knife. She was trying to stab me. She just kept screaming, "Where is he? Where is he?" At this point, she had fallen to the ground trying to take me down with her. After a minute of this, my father finally came running in with my aunt and lifted her up. I was too scared to use any force because I didn't want to hurt her, but I also didn't want to get stabbed. I was so angry and upset I started to grab my things and told my family I was leaving. As I made my way toward the door, she walked back into the living room and said in a calm voice, "Oh, where are you going? You haven't even finished your coffee." I just left and didn't even respond. This woman, my grandmother, tried to stab me, and I still have no idea why. I found out several weeks later from my cousin that after my father and I left, my grandmother cried for hours and was basically inconsolable. She didn't know why we were so angry and left so abruptly. Clearly, my grandma had some sort of episode that night that she can't remember. But there are so many unanswered questions like, who was she referring to? I haven't seen or spoken to her since. My dad did try to reach out and explain to her why we left and why we won't be coming back, but she doesn't believe he is telling her the truth when he transcribes the events back to her. The worst part about all of this is that this will probably be the Christmas that I always remember the most. This is a short story that happened to me approximately 3 to 4 years ago. I used to work for a charitable company that would distribute presents to families or individuals in need during the holiday time. For the most part, I loved this job. It paid decently well and was incredibly rewarding. But on this one specific Christmas Eve, it was enough for me to never want to do something like this again. I usually worked or traveled with another associate named Jose, but since it was Christmas Eve and it was our last stop, I told him I would go alone, and he could go home to his wife and enjoy what was left of the holiday. It was about 5 p.m., so it was getting pretty dark as I made my way toward the recipient's house. I arrived and went up to the door with a big tote of presents all wrapped and ready to be distributed as they pleased. A man answered the door in pajama pants and a skin-tight sleeveless shirt. The guy was overweight and clearly did not take care of himself. He looked like he hadn't shaved or showered in weeks. I said to him in my still bubbly voice, "Hi, I'm Jamie, and I'm here to drop off the presents." He stared at me and smiled with his yellow, unbrushed teeth. He looked right at me and said, "Wow, you sure are pretty," which freaked me out a little bit. I just awkwardly smiled and said, "Thanks." He then said, "Honey, I have a lot of trouble with my back and I can't lift these presents. Will you please bring them into my living room for me?" Like a fool, I complied, as this wasn't an uncommon request to bring the presents in the home for those receiving them. I walked in, and the man shut the door behind me. I walked slowly in his near-pitch-black house. When I noticed in the few seconds of being in this house was that there were no signs of children, Christmas decorations, or anything that even looked remotely festive. I turned around to ask him where I was going, and that's when I noticed him. He was hunched over and staring at me like I was a piece of meat, basically salivating. He started to approach me and put his arms out like he was going for an embrace or a hug. More creeped out than I've ever been in my entire life, I decided the answer was to just run away. I dropped the presents there and ran to the door. He locked it behind me. The knob was locked, and so was the chain. I quickly was able to get them undone and out of the house without any further incident. I got into my car and called my supervisor and explained the situation to him. What he told me next made my eyes fill up with tears. I had mixed up 2 of the numbers in my GPS when I set out for the house. I was on the wrong block and clearly at the wrong house. The guy wasn't expecting presents and played along to get me into his house. I have no idea what his intentions were and am thankful nothing else happened. Running through the scenario in my head makes me wonder how I was able to undo the locks before he grabbed me or made a move towards the door. However, his pause in action or change of heart may have very well saved my life.